Stories, Philippines, podcast.
The rain had a peculiar way of washing Manila at night. It didn't cleanse the city so much as it made the shadows slicker, deeper, turning the light from the passing jeepneys into oily, distorting smears. It was the kind of darkness that felt less like the absence of light and more like a heavy, breathing presence settling over the streets. Imagine the humming of 1,000 air conditioning units sighing in unison, a tired, mechanical lullaby to a city that never truly slept. Have you ever driven down a road where the fog wasn't mist but memory, a thick, cold vapor that seemed to whisper things only your headlights could hear? A road so well known, so mundane during the day, yet so utterly transformed by the blanket of night and the weight of its own whispered history that it becomes a character in itself, a hungry, waiting presence. In the heart of Quezon City, a major artery of Metro Manila, there's a street that embodies this duality. It is a stretch of asphalt and pavement lined with venerable, ancient trees, their canopies so dense they block out the city's light pollution and create pockets of profound, impenetrable blackness. This is Balete Drive, a name that, for generations of Filipinos, has been less a street sign and more a cautionary tale. It is a road that, according to the countless stories passed from driver to driver, from night watchman to security guard, has the unsettling habit of making people disappear, or worse, of making things appear that should not exist at all. The 1970s and 80s saw a dramatic surge in Metro Manila's population and its relentless pace of life. The burgeoning garment industries, the call centers, the hospitals, the media houses all necessitated a new breed of worker. People whose shifts began when the sun went down. The taxi driver, the call center agent, the nurse, the security guard, these were the nocturnal custodians of the city. They were the ones who truly knew the shape of the night, and they were the ones who were most vulnerable to its strange, unsettling residents. Back then, a drive was a different experience. Car phones were a luxury, not a necessity. Radio waves were often static. You were truly alone in the metal shell of your vehicle, cut off from the easy reassurance of the world. And it was on nights like these, when the rain lashed against the windshield and the radio faded into a low hiss, that the tales of Balete Drive would crawl out of the darkness and into the driver's seat beside you. The road itself is named for the balete tree, a species that holds a place of profound significance and dread in Filipino cultural belief. Throughout the islands, the balete is not simply a tree, it is an ecosystem, a cathedral of roots and branches, often growing to enormous sizes with a dense, shadowy foliage. In the folklore of the Philippines, these majestic, towering trees are believed to be the preferred dwelling of nature spirits. They are often called encanto or encanto, a general term for supernatural beings who are not necessarily malicious, but certainly capricious and territorial. To offend an encanto by disturbing its tree is to invite misfortune, illness, or a kind of chilling, bewildering terror. The balete tree, with its gnarled, intertwining roots that look like the veins of a titan and its heavy, silent canopy, becomes a powerful symbol. It is the place where the human world brushes up uncomfortably close against the realm of the unseen. It is the nexus point. But the phantom of Balete Drive is not a monstrous, ancient encanto. It is something far more modern, far more human in its tragedy. It is the story of the White Lady, a spectral figure that is as much a cautionary urban legend as it is a genuine, chilling experience for those who have encountered her. One such person was Leonardo Leo Cortez, a taxi driver in his early 30s in the 1980s. Leo was a practical man. He had a wife and 3 young children to support in Tondo. He worked the graveyard shift because the fares were better and the traffic, mercifully, thinner. He had a routine, coffee, a smoke, and the perpetual grinding exhaustion that comes with perpetually moving against the sun's schedule. One night, around 2 in the morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the road slick and mirror-like. Leo was cruising along the quiet stretch of Balete Drive. He had just dropped off a passenger in a nearby residential area and was heading back to the main thoroughfare. The streetlights here were few and far between, forcing his yellow headlights to pierce the inky blackness. He was focused on the road, humming a popular 1980s Filipino rock song, when his rear view mirror caught a flash of white. He instinctively glanced up. There was a woman sitting in the back seat. Leo felt a cold, paralyzing dread seize his chest. His cab had been empty. He had checked. He always checked. He hadn't stopped, hadn't slowed down, hadn't picked up a fare. The doors were locked. The air in the cab, usually stuffy with the lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener, was suddenly arctic. Figure was slight, wearing what looked like a flowing white dress or a gown. Her hair was long and black, obscuring her face, which was tilted down. She was absolutely unnervingly still. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He couldn't speak. The sheer impossibility of her presence was like a physical weight pressing him into his seat. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that this was not a flesh and blood person. He was driving fast down the road that everyone said was haunted. He knew the stories. Every driver knew the stories. The one where she appears out of nowhere. The one where she asks for a ride only to vanish. The one where she makes you crash. The one where you look at her face. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His mind raced, a frantic animal trapped in a corner. Do not look at her face. Do not acknowledge her. Drive. He kept his eyes glued to the road ahead, trying to breathe, trying to rationalize. Maybe he was tired. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection. But the air was too cold, the silence in the backseat too profound. Suddenly a voice, soft and breathy, a whisper that seemed to originate from the air itself rather than a throat, reached his ears. It was in English, an unusual detail that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Sir, can you take me to the corner of this street? Leo, frozen in terror, could only manage a choked, silent nod. The rational part of him screamed to slam on the brakes and bolt, but the paralyzing fear rooted him to the spot. He knew he had to get off Balete Drive. He accelerated, desperate to reach the end of the spectral corridor. He kept glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. The figure remained utterly still. He could not make out her features, just the cascade of dark hair and the pure, shocking white of her garment against the dark upholstery. Finally, the intersection came into view. A cluster of brighter streetlights, the welcome sight of a 7-Eleven convenience store that felt like a beacon of the living world. He slowed the cab to a crawl. He waited, holding his breath for the sound of a door opening, for a thank you, for any sign of a normal interaction. Nothing. He finally dared to look up into the mirror. The back seat was empty, the chill in the car was gone, replaced by the familiar, humid Manila night air. There was no one. The seat was flat, undisturbed. Leo didn't check the side mirror, didn't check the doors. He slammed his foot on the gas and sped away from Balete Drive, shaking, his mind reeling from the impossible vanishing act. He drove until the sun began to rise, bathing the city in the exhausted, hopeful light of morning. He pulled over, got out of his cab, and vomited on the curb. When he finally told his wife, Maria Elena, what happened, she didn't laugh or dismiss him. She simply made the sign of the cross and told him he was lucky he didn't look back. She told him that the stories were true. The road was a place where the veil between worlds was thin, and the white lady was not a spirit to be trifled with. Leo Cortez never drove Balete Drive at night again, no matter how much better the fare. He chose a different route, a longer route, a safer route. He had tasted the cold reality of the legend, and it had left him with a haunting certainty. The vanishing road of white silk wasn't just a place. It was a predator lying in wait for the tired, the alone, and the unwary. It was the modern Encanto, a ghost for the age of the automobile, a dark morality tale whispered into the ear of the nighttime commuter. Have you ever considered that a ghost story isn't just about a ghost, but about the things we, the living, are trying to forget? about a violence, a trauma, or a moment of unbearable injustice that the ground itself refuses to absorb? Perhaps the spectral women of the world, whether in Manila, London, or New Orleans, are all victims demanding a witness. I am Paul, and you're listening to Stories Philippines podcast. To understand the White Lady of Balete Drive, we must first truly grasp the geography and the historical context that nurtured the legend. Balete Drive, situated in Quezon City, is not a secluded country road. It is a residential street that connects two major busy thoroughfares, E. Rodriguez Avenue and Aurora Boulevard. During the 1970s and 80s, the area was experiencing rapid development. Large, sprawling colonial-era houses sat cheek by jowl with new modern subdivisions. It was a street of transitions, a place where the old money and the old ways of life met the relentless, forward-moving tide of urbanization. The street itself is distinct. It is unusually straight, flanked on both sides by high walls and the magnificent, often centuries-old balete trees themselves. In the day, the canopy filters the intense Philippine sun, creating a cool, almost somber atmosphere. At night, the absence of continuous bright street lighting turns that same canopy into a suffocating ceiling of shadow. The stillness is unnerving, especially when contrasted with the din of the nearby main road. It becomes a vacuum, a pocket of silence in the city's ceaseless roar. This geographic characteristic is crucial. Ghost stories often thrive in these liminal spaces, areas that are neither fully urban nor completely rural, neither entirely public nor strictly private. Balete Drive is a public road running through essentially private, high-walled properties. This sense of isolation, of being watched but seeing nothing, fuels the anxiety of the nighttime traveler. The specific nature of the White Lady legend places it firmly within a global recurring phenomenon, the phantom hitchhiker. This is one of the most widespread and enduring of modern urban legends found in nearly every culture that drives on paved roads. From La Llorona of Mexico and the American Southwest, to the famous Vanishing Lady of Resurrection Cemetery in Chicago, and even similar stories on the back roads of Japan, the narrative arc is almost identical. A solitary driver, usually male and often working late, encounters a mysterious, distressed woman dressed in white who asks for a ride, only to vanish before reaching the destination. But the White Lady of Balete Drive carries a uniquely Filipino layer. Unlike many international hitchhiker ghosts who are simply victims of an accident or illness, the Filipino version often intertwines with a darker, more sinister narrative: untold violence. While the official, most popular version of the Balete Drive story often vaguely alludes to a car accident victim or a jilted lover, the more persistent and terrifying whisper concerns an act of extreme brutality and violation. The story suggests that the young woman, often depicted as a beautiful co-ed or a resident of the area, was assaulted and murdered during the dark days of the 1940s, possibly during the brutal Japanese occupation or the tumultuous post-war period when lawlessness was rampant. Some versions of the tale say she was killed by a Japanese soldier, others by a corrupt policeman or cruel, wealthy resident. This deep-seated link to a violent historical trauma transforms the ghost from a mere echo of a life into a cultural symbol of unaddressed historical pain. The Philippines has a deeply complex and painful history of occupation and conflict. The stories of brutality, of abuses of power, and of women who were victims of wartime atrocities are not just distant history, they are woven into the very fabric of national memory. The White Lady, then, is not just one woman's ghost. She is a collective manifestation of the fear of male violence and the injustice that the system often failed to address, an encanto of pure sorrow. The cultural belief in the balete tree adds another crucial layer. If the tree is the home of the nature spirits, the latganta, then the woman who haunts its stretch of road is likely not just a spirit of a deceased human. She could be a human soul trapped or perhaps even consumed and mimicked by a more ancient, territorial spirit using her tragedy to lure the living. Filipino folklore is replete with beings that mimic human form to interact with or torment people, such as the Tiyayanak or the Sairena. The Encanto are masters of illusion. This brings us to a compelling psychological and theological question. Is the spirit the victim, or is it the place that is cursed? Theological insights. particularly within a predominantly Catholic culture like the Philippines, often view such persistent apparitions with a blend of compassion and caution. The prevailing Catholic view on apparitions that are not declared as divine is that they could be suffering souls in need of prayer to find peace, or, more darkly, demonic manifestations using the guise of a victim to create fear and sow spiritual confusion. Exorcists and priests often warn that engaging with such entities is dangerous, as it gives them spiritual license to interact further. Hence, the constant local advice. Do not look at her face. Do not speak to her. Do not acknowledge her. It is a spiritual command to withhold engagement and authority. Meanwhile, the psychological perspective sees the stories as a type of modern morality tale. In a rapidly industrializing city where working hours stretch and safety is a constant concern, the White Lady serves as a chilling warning against isolation, exhaustion, and nighttime vulnerability. The story says, be alert, do not drive tired, do not take shortcuts, do not allow yourself to be distracted. She is the ultima supernatural consequence of a city's relentless pace. The legend of Balete Drive is therefore an intricate tapestry. It is a global template of the phantom hitchhiker, overlaid with a uniquely Filipino history of trauma, anchored by a powerful cultural belief in the ancient Encanto trees and sustained by the psychological anxieties of the modern nocturnal workforce. It is a road that forces the living to reckon not just with a ghost, but with history, theology, and the profound, silent power of the land itself. The human mind, especially when fatigued or under duress, is a masterful deceiver. We see shapes in the clouds, faces in the shadows, and patterns where none exist. This phenomenon, known as pareidolia, is a survival mechanism gone slightly haywire. It's the brain's desperate attempt to make the unknown known, to categorize the ambiguous shadow as a person, a threat, or an apparition. Now apply this principle to the exhausted taxi driver, like Leo Cortez traversing the slick dark isolation of Balete Drive at 2 in the morning. Their circadian rhythms are disrupted. They are often subsisting on black coffee and adrenaline. Their visual field is dominated by the narrow cones of their headlights, which often create stark, shifting contrasts of light and shadow, the perfect conditions for hallucination and misinterpretation. Psychological studies on sleep deprivation consistently show a decrease in critical thinking and an increase in suggestibility. When you combine physical exhaustion with the power of suggestion, the knowledge that you are on that road, the one everyone whispers about, the stage is set for a powerful psychological event. The White Lady of Balete Drive functions as a psychological trigger rooted in the collective unconscious of the city. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung proposed that humans inherit certain predispositions and shared patterns of thought, or archetypes. The woman in white is a potent, near-universal archetype. The tragic female figure, the spurned lover, the violated innocent, the harbinger of death. In the context of Balete Drive, she is the crystallization of Manila's anxieties about unpunished crimes and the dangerous vulnerability of women in public spaces. When a driver believes in the legend, every flicker of movement, every odd reflection, every shift in temperature is instantly interpreted through the filter of the legend. This is known as confirmation bias. The mind is not seeking truth, it is seeking validation for the story it already knows. Consider the sensory details reported by drivers: the sudden profound cold, the unnerving stillness, the glimpse of white in the mirror. The sudden cold is often reported by paranormal investigators worldwide and is interpreted as a spirit drawing energy from the environment to manifest. A more earthbound explanation might involve the draft dynamics of a passing truck, a sudden drop in humidity, or the physiological sensation of a panic attack, which constricts blood vessels and can cause chills. But the collective narrative gives the cold an immediate sinister meaning. The stillness is real. Due to the high walls and large trees, the sound dampening on Balete Drive is significant. This lack of the usual city noise contributes to the unsettling atmosphere, creating a sensory deprivation effect that allows the mind to generate its own stimuli. And the white dress. Why white? White is universally symbolic. It represents purity, innocence, and bridal gowns, but in the context of ghosts, it often represents the burial shroud. In the tropical, rainy climate of Manila, a bright white object is highly visible at night. A piece of wind-blown trash, a reflection of a street sign, a white plastic bag. It only takes a millisecond of perception for the brain to fill in the rest and construct the full figure, especially in the peripheral vision. However, the psychological explanation does not dismiss the experience. For the person involved, the fear and the certainty are absolutely real. Leo Cortez's terror, his physical sickness, and his subsequent refusal to drive the route are not fabrications. They are the genuine emotional and physical consequences of a profound, explicable event. The modern paranormal investigation community often uses technology to try and bridge the gap between psychological phenomena and genuine spectral activity. In the 1980s and 90s, ghost hunting was still a relatively nascent field, but it was gaining traction globally. Investigators would use electromagnetic field (EMF) meters. A few local Filipino paranormal groups, often operating quietly and informally, did conduct visits to Balete Drive. The reports, circulated mostly through mimeographed newsletters or private groups, often cited 1. Localized cold spots that could not be explained by air conditioning or drafts. 2. Sudden battery drainage in recording equipment and flashlights, a common anecdotal claim in hauntings. 3. Visual anomalies captured on film, often vague shapes or streaks of light known as rods or orbs, which, while often debunked as dust or insects, kept the mystery alive. These findings, whether truly paranormal or simply artifacts of a flawed investigation, serve to validate the driver's experiences. They gave the unseen a measurable scientific dimension, lending credibility to the legend in an age that was increasingly turning to technology for answers. Yet, even with EMF meters and temperature guns, the core of the story remains psychological, the collective cultural trauma that manifests as a spectral warning. The road itself becomes a canvas onto which the city projects its deepest fears. It is not just the white lady who haunts the street. It is the memory of injustice. And until that memory is acknowledged and put to rest, the shadow will remain, lurking in the blind spot of the collective consciousness, waiting for the next lonely driver to glance up at the mirror. Remember that this podcast relies on stories from people like you. We want to hear the terrifying, the inexplicable, and the deeply personal accounts that challenge our understanding of reality. Submit your stories at storiesphilippines.com and let your own shadows find the light. The most compelling ghosts are those tethered to a moment of profound, undeniable historical suffering. The White Lady of Balete Drive is no exception. The most persistent, darkest versions of the legend consistently point back to a time of unimaginable brutality and unchecked power, the Japanese occupation of the Philippines during World War II, spanning from 1942 to 1945. The war years in Manila were a time of terror. The city suffered immense destruction, and the civilian population endured severe hardship, starvation, and rampant atrocities. In this environment, where the normal systems of law and justice had collapsed, the most heinous acts could be carried out with impunity. The period was marked by the presence of the Japanese Imperial Army, whose soldiers, police, and collaborators often held absolute power over Filipino civilians. The narrative whispered about the White Lady places her death during this era. The victim, described often as a young, beautiful woman from a prominent or well-to-do family in the Balete area, was allegedly ambushed, assaulted, and brutally murdered. The motive often suggested is not robbery, but the gratification of power and lust. The crime was committed under the shadow of the Balete trees, and her body was sometimes said to have been hurriedly or imperfectly disposed of near. Why does this specific historical trauma cling to the legend? Firstly, the story provides a reason for the haunting. Unlike a simple accident, a murder by a powerful, occupying force represents a complete failure of justice. A soul that has been violently taken and whose killer was never brought to account is in many cultures bound to the place of their death. The trauma is so immense that it imprints itself onto the very landscape. Secondly, it taps into the deep, collective wounds of the war. Filipinos do not easily forget the horrors of the occupation. By linking the White Lady to a Japanese soldier or a wartime collaborator, the legend transforms into a powerful, albeit subtle, expression of national memory and resistance. She becomes a martyr, a reminder of what was lost, and a perpetual sentinel against foreign intrusion or local betrayal. Her haunting is a quiet, spectral protest against historical injustice. This is not a unique phenomenon. Throughout Asia and indeed the world, the ghosts of World War II are particularly active. The countless war dead, the victims of concentration camps and forced labor, and those killed in the brutal urban warfare are believed to linger. In Japan itself, there are many tales of yurei spirits connected to wartime suffering and specific battlegrounds. Similarly, in many European countries, sites of Nazi atrocities are often associated with profound, disturbing paranormal activity. The White Lady of Balete Drive is Manila's contribution to this global ghosts of war phenomenon. The specifics of the assault also link her story to the concept of comfort women, a horrific chapter in the war where young women were systematically forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military. While the Balete Drive story typically focuses on a single victim, the broader cultural awareness of these war crimes contributes to the terror and urgency of the White Lady's story. She represents the fear of a woman's body being a battleground, a horror that continues to echo in the cultural psyche. The cultural response to this type of haunting also shifts. If the ghost is an encanto from the balete tree, the response is one of deference and appeasement. You ask permission, you leave offerings. But if the ghost is a human victim of wartime atrocity, the response is one of pity, prayer, and historical redress. The two interpretations exist simultaneously, creating a complex, layered fear. Is she a capricious nature spirit or a suffering human soul? The modern phase of the legend, which rose to prominence in the 1970s and 80s, coincides with the increasing democratization of the city. More people were driving, more people were out late. The rise of the urban legend during this period suggests a need to contain and control the past. As the city modernized, the stories of the old war trauma were transferred to a modern vehicle, the taxi or the private car, to keep them relevant. The ghost migrated from the shadows of a bombed-out structure to the backseat of a Ford Cortina. Consider the detailed geographic descriptions again. The large old houses of Balete Drive belong to families that would have lived through the occupation. The trees would have been silent witnesses. The road itself is an archive. For the people who live there, the legend is a hyper-local immediate reality. We can try to dismiss it with psychology, with the science of exhaustion and suggestion, but we cannot ignore the historical core. The White Lady of Balete Drive asks us to remember that the road we drive on is not just asphalt and concrete. It is the soil where blood was spilt, where injustice was buried, and where a deep, violent secret still awaits its proper reckoning. It's in these moments of connection between history and the supernatural that we find the most compelling truths. The world is often stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. To help us keep uncovering these truths and connecting the dots between history and the haunting, please consider supporting the podcast. Find show notes and support options in the description of this episode, including information on our partners who make this research possible. The power of the White Lady legend lies not just in its local context, but in its profound resonance with global folklore. This figure, the solitary woman in white appearing at night on a road, serves as a kind of spectral trade commodity, traveling the Silk Road of ghosts from east to west. Understanding these international parallels helps us decode the deeper cultural anxieties she represents. In Europe, the most famous parallel is the numerous legends of the Dames Blanches or White Ladies. These tales, particularly prevalent in French, German, and English folklore, often involve a noblewoman who suffered betrayal, a tragic death, or was walled up alive in a castle. Their appearance is frequently tied to specific, ancient roadways or waterways, and they are often seen as omens of death or misfortune for the family to whom the property belongs. The common thread is unresolved grief and aristocratic tragedy. Across the Pacific in the United States, the ubiquitous La Llorona, the weeping woman, represents a distinct but connected archetype. Her story is one of despair, a woman who drowned her children in a river, often after being spurned by her husband, and is condemned to forever weep and search for them. She haunts riverbanks, ravines, and dark stretches of road. Her tragedy is one of maternal grief and sin. While the White Lady of Balete Drive is not searching for children, both spirits occupy the same space, a female figure whose immense sorrow and tragic act or suffering has kept her bound to a transitional space. Closer to the Philippines in Southeast Asia, the spirit known as the Pontianak in Malaysia and Indonesia offers a terrifying contrast. A Pontianak is the ghost of a woman who died during childbirth. She is often depicted in white, but she is far more overtly malevolent. She preys on men, is known to lure victims with her beauty, and has sharp claws and an insatiable hunger for blood or internal organs. The Pontianak represents the primal fear of female rage and failed biological function. The White Lady of Balete Drive occupies a middle ground among these global sisters in white. She possesses the tragic, stationary quality of the European Dame Blanche. She is tied to a specific road and a former status. She shares the profound sorrow and perpetual wandering of La Llorona. But crucially, she lacks the overt bloodlust of the Pontianak. Her terror is one of presence and vanishing, a silent, chilling encounter that leaves the driver alive but profoundly traumatized. Why this difference? The lack of direct malevolence in the core Balete Drive story often reflects the Filipino cultural value of awa, or compassion. Even in death, the victim is often portrayed not as a vengeful monster, but as a suffering entity in need of peace. The warning is not about a demonic attack, but about the profound danger of seeing her, a danger that is less physical and more spiritual or psychological. The international parallel of the Phantom Hitchhiker also has cultural significance. This story is an automotive ghost, a phenomenon that only arose with the advent of cars, paved roads, and night driving. It signifies the human anxiety about the new technology and the loss of traditional community. In the Philippines, the rise of the legend coincided with the growth of Metro Manila and its sprawling suburbs. The taxicab, the ultimate symbol of urban anonymity and transitional space, became the perfect setting for a ghost story. It's a modern morality play where the convenience of the machine is countered by the terror of the spiritual world, reasserting its power. In many ways, the White Lady is a cultural barometer. Her story reflects the level of trust in the established systems. When the police, the justice system, and the government fail to protect and provide justice, the people turn to the supernatural for explanation and even retribution. The fact that her killer was never identified or punished makes her a permanent cultural landmark of a justice system shortfall. Her haunting is a constant, low-grade reminder that the living world failed her. The naming of the tree itself, the balete, is a cultural choice that transcends mere botany. The tree is not just a landmark, it is a gateway. In the Philippines, cutting down a balete tree is considered a foolhardy and dangerous act, guaranteed to anger the encanto. The tree is a reminder that even in the middle of a massive metropolis, nature's spirits and the deep, pre-colonial spiritual beliefs of the islands still hold sway. The road is asphalt and concrete, but the tree is ancient myth, and the two are locked in a perpetual spiritual battle. When we hear the story of the White Lady, we are listening to a global conversation about tragedy, technology, and the nature of the soul, all filtered through a distinct, profound Filipino cultural lens. She is the ghost that connects Manila to the castles of France and the rivers of Mexico, a universal tragedy played out on a specific haunted stretch of road. If you find yourself connecting with the history and mystery we discuss and want to support the deep research and narrative work we do, please consider becoming a patron, access exclusive content on Patreon, and help us keep telling these uniquely Filipino stories. To the scientific mind, the White Lady of Balete Drive is a classic case study in perception, environment, and psychology. Skeptics offer several rational, non-supernatural explanations for the sightings, each attempting to chip away at the legend's spectral foundation by anchoring it firmly in observable phenomena. Yet the persistence and consistency of the accounts over decades challenge the completeness of a purely scientific dismissal. Let's look closely at the conditions of the sightings, which primarily occur late at night, in the dark, and usually in conditions of rain or fog. Visual fatigue and optical illusions. As discussed, the vast majority of witnesses are nocturnal workers, notably taxi drivers, who suffer from chronic sleep deprivation and visual fatigue. The constant focus on the road, combined with the rhythmic flicker of oncoming headlights and the stark contrast created by the dark tree line, can create Muller-Lyer illusions or other perceptual distortions. The driver's eye might register a flash of white, and the fatigued brain, primed by the legend, immediately constructs the form of a woman. The role of reflected light, the street itself, especially when wet from rain, acts as a giant, unpredictable mirror. The high gloss of the asphalt reflects the car's headlights, streetlights, and the ambient glow of the city in unexpected ways. A white sign, a patch of light-colored paint, or even a sudden burst of light from a distant vehicle could be caught in a driver's peripheral vision, bounce off the wet road, and create a fleeting, ghostly impression in the rearview mirror. The vanishing act is simply the reflection moving out of the necessary angle. Infrasound and VLF, a less common but fascinating scientific theory, involves the concept of infrasound and very low frequency VLF electromagnetism. Infrasound, sound pitched too low for human ears to consciously hear, can be generated naturally by high winds, distant traffic, or even the subtle vibrations of large structures like bridges or, conceivably, large ancient trees. Research has shown that exposure to high levels of infrasound can cause profound physical effects, including sensations of coldness, anxiety, chills, a feeling of being watched, and even visual disturbances by vibrating the eyeballs. Baleta Drive, with its ancient towering trees and the nearby constant drone of heavy city traffic, could potentially be an area of natural infrasound concentration. Similarly, the natural movement of tectonic plates or the presence of specific minerals could create localized electromagnetic anomalies. While often difficult to prove, some theories suggest that these natural energy fields can affect the brain's temporal lobe, the area associated with spiritual and sensory perception. This could explain the shared experiences of fear and altered reality among different people in the same location. The human component, mass hysteria and social proof. The legend gained its footing and achieves its longevity not just through individual sightings, but through the constant social reinforcement within the taxi and night worker community. Every new driver is quickly initiated into the rules and dangers of the road, and the white lady is often mentioned as the number one threat. When a person hears a story repeatedly from trusted sources, the mind becomes preconditioned. This creates a powerful social proof where the legend's validity is accepted because so many others have also accepted it. A driver who doesn't experience something might feel like the outlier, and any ambiguous experience is quickly shaped to fit the established narrative. However, the scientific explanations, while rational, struggle to account for the consistency of the narrative details. Why is it almost always a woman in white? Why is the appearance so often in the back seat? And why the sudden, complete vanishing? If it were purely random optical illusions or fatigue, the stories would be far more varied, involving different shapes, colors, or locations on the road. The fact that the details remain so stable over generations suggests an experience that is either truly shared or one that has been perfectly maintained through storytelling. The search for scientific closure often reveals the limits of our current understanding of consciousness and environment. Even if the trigger is an infrasound pocket or an optical illusion, the experience, the terror, and the behavioral change of the witness are real. The ghost of Baleta Drive forces science and skepticism to confront the power of the human imagination and the undeniable lingering effect of cultural belief on perception. The road is a living laboratory where physics and folklore intersect. You believe every voice has a story that deserves to be heard. We've done the research, now share your reality. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. The conversation continues online, and we want to hear your perspective on these haunting intersections of science and the strange. As the years moved from the 1980s into the 1990s, in the new millennium, the legend of the White Lady began to evolve, influenced by technology and the changing landscape of media. What started as whispered warnings among taxi drivers became a subject of formal investigation and public spectacle. In the late 1990s, a new generation of local paranormal investigators, influenced by television shows from the West, began to approach Balete Drive with more sophisticated equipment. Groups would use thermal imaging cameras to capture temperature fluctuations, which might identify localized cold spots that are not due to external drafts or air conditioning. They also utilized Geiger counters based on the often speculated theory that spectral phenomena may emit or interfere with low-level radiation, though this is highly disputed in the scientific community. The findings from these organized investigations were predictably inconclusive. While certain spots on the road and near the larger balete trees were consistently reported to have drops in ambient temperature and spikes in EMF readings, these readings could often be attributed to older electrical wiring in the nearby houses, groundwater, or the deep shade provided by the dense canopies. No clear, undeniable photographic or video evidence of the White Lady herself ever surfaced from these formal groups. The true terror, it seemed, remained an experience reserved for the individual, the solitary driver, where the conditions of the encounter were perfect for fear and misinterpretation. Yet, the investigations themselves served to re-legitimize the myth. By taking the phenomenon seriously, the media and the public renewed the legend. Balete Drive became a destination for the curious and the brave. This had a strange, counterintuitive effect. For a time, the road was less spooky because the ghost was expected. The original, isolated terror of the lone driver was replaced by the collective excitement of ghost hunters and thrill seekers. This shift in the cultural status of the ghost invites a deeper theological reflection within the context of the predominantly Catholic Philippines. The Church's perspective on these events is nuanced, straddling the line between traditional folk belief and official doctrine. For many Filipinos, the White Lady is not just a ghost, but a kaluulua, a soul in a state of suffering. The most common theological advice is prayer for the repose of her soul. The Catholic emphasis on mercy, purgatory, and intercession means that the community can actively help the spirit move on, saying a quick prayer, making the sign of the cross, or even having a mass offered for the deceased are culturally sanctioned, peaceful responses to a haunting. This approach diffuses the malevolence often assigned to the spirit, turning the ghost into an object of pity and spiritual duty. The darker theological interpretation, as mentioned before, views such powerful, persistent hauntings as potentially demonic in origin. In this view, the entity is not the soul of the victim, but a deceptive spirit using the guise of a tragic figure to cause fear, distract from true faith, or even attempt spiritual possession. The fear of looking at her face becomes a critical element. It is a fear of the true, potentially demonic identity being revealed, and the subsequent spiritual attack it might invite. Exorcists emphasize that a blessed object, prayer, and invoking the name of the Holy Trinity are the only true defenses against such a powerful entity. This duality of interpretation within the culture is what keeps the legend so potent. Is she a victim demanding compassion and prayer, or is she a predator demanding spiritual vigilance? The driver must make a split-second decision that could determine their mental and spiritual well-being. The geographical descriptions also gain a theological layer. The balete tree, a natural ancient landmark, becomes the domain of the Encanto, spirits that predate the arrival of Christianity. The coexistence of the Catholic prayer for the soul and the pre-colonial deference to the Encanto at the tree root itself is a profound snapshot of Filipino spirituality. The two belief systems live side by side, creating a rich, sometimes contradictory spiritual landscape where the ghost is simultaneously a Christian suffering soul and a traditional nature spirit. In the end, the investigations could not capture her, and the theological debates could not define her. The White Lady remains an elusive, perfect phantom, a testament to the fact that some truths are not meant to be recorded on film or categorized in a sermon. They are only meant to be experienced, to be carried away in the silent, trembling heart of a lonely driver on a dark, wet road. We are drawing close to the end of this episode, and we want to hear from you. We appreciate every listener, and your support is what keeps the lights on and the stories flowing. If you value this unique blend of history, folklore, and the strange, please consider supporting us. You can find detailed information on how to help in the show notes and support options in the description. The White Lady of Balete Drive is more than an urban legend. She's a mirror reflecting the anxieties of a developing nation. Her story, woven from the dark threads of wartime trauma, ancient folklore, and the relentless pace of modern life, shows how the past refuses to stay buried, finding new ways to manifest in the age of the automobile. Today, Baleta Drive is a significantly different street than the one Leo Cortez drove in the 1980s. The canopy has been trimmed, the street lights are brighter, and traffic, even late at night, is heavier. The road is often crowded with the bright, distracting glare of modern commercial signs. In theory, the conditions for the isolated, terrifying encounter are no longer perfect. The darkness has been pushed back. And yet, the stories persist. The new generation of rideshare drivers and late-night delivery couriers continue to report the feeling of an unnerving presence. The accounts have simply adapted to the new technology. A fleeting reflection in a phone screen, a strange glitch in a GPS application, a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread near a specific ancient baleti tree. The ghost of the White Lady has proven to be as adaptable as the city itself. She does not need the profound darkness of the 1980s to make her presence known. She simply needs the moment of distraction, the flicker of doubt, the deep cultural memory of her tragedy. The enduring nature of her tale leaves us with profound, unsettling questions. Firstly, the nature of the trauma. If the true source of the haunting is the violent murder of a young woman during a time of war, does the spirit truly seek rest? Or does she seek acknowledgement? Is the only way to silence the ghost to finally unearth the true historical record, to name the victim, and to honor her memory with the justice she was denied in life? As long as the crime remains an open historical wound, will she remain a perpetual sentinel of injustice? Secondly, the role of the collective unconscious. Even if every single sighting could be scientifically explained by exhaustion, infrasound, or optical illusion, what does it say about the city that this particular narrative of the woman in white is the one that is perpetually summoned? It suggests a deep, ongoing cultural anxiety about the safety of women, the failure of the justice system, and the terrifying anonymity of urban life. The White Lady is the psychic wound of Metro Manila given form. Thirdly, the power of the land and the encanto. Is it possible that the human tragedy of the victim was simply the necessary catalyst for a pre-existing, non-human entity to manifest? That the balete tree, the true source of the spiritual power, absorbed the profound, raw emotion of the murder and used it to cloak an older, more tutorial spirit? In this scenario, no amount of prayer or historical justice would suffice. The road and the tree are simply a place of power, a nexus, and they demand a perpetual toll of fear from the passing living. The vanishing road of white silk forces us to consider that the past is never truly gone. It simply waits for the cover of night, for the solitary driver, and for the moment we are too tired to maintain our skeptical defenses. It reminds us that our cities are built not just on concrete, but on layers of human sorrow, ancient power, and profound secrets. Drive the road today, and you are not just on Balete Drive. You are on a time machine, a spiritual battlefield, and a silent archive of the nation's unhealed wounds. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the White Lady is the quiet, terrifying realization that sometimes, when you look into the darkness looks back, and sometimes it needs a ride. I am Paul, and this has been Stories Philippines podcast. What is the price of forgetting a terrible truth? And can a ghost ever truly find peace if the living refuse to deliver justice? Join us next time as we delve into another chilling corner of Filipino history and folklore. Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with those who dare to listen to the shadows. You can support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes. Thank you, and have a good night.